Hey, everybody, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, we find brilliant human beings so that we can help our small and medium-sized nonprofit friends do more good. And one of the things that I think our nonprofit friends, and I know you agree with me, is that, well, how do you deal with some volunteer issues? I know we talked about it before, but I've got some interesting concepts that I want to talk with you today. What if a volunteer comes to your organization and you don't necessarily want him? Or you really want them and you have unreasonable expectations for that person? Oh, what do you do? So I got a super brilliant human being to come on to the podcast today, and a super good friend of myself, which is a very rarity on the podcast, as I get good friends who know what the hell they're talking about. Number three happened to be a published author. So that's like a 3-4. I'm not really sure what that does. It's like you get a gold medal, I think, in the asterisks of the corner of the iTunes segment here. I would like to welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast, Tim Koerner, author of What Does a Screen Mean? Co-worker with me for a number of years. Tim, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks, Kirby. It's good to be with you. Nice to be talking with you again.
Very true. Usually we spend more time sending memes via the internet and or text messages. And it's nice to chat with you here. If somebody's scrolling through the old iTunes or scrolling through wherever they find their favorite podcast to listen to, and they want to learn about a little bit of volunteer stuff, they see your name, but they don't really know who you are yet. You're almost becoming and will be soon super famous author that I said I knew before was a super famous author. Why don't you give everybody kind of a 5,000-foot view of who you are, what you do, background, and why we're talking today?
Yeah, you bet. So I guess at this point, it's been about 14 years since you and I crossed paths at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Minnesota, Dakota's chapter, way back in the Rose Ridge building in Roseville, Minnesota. So I was there as a fundraiser for about 3 years. You outlasted me by a couple of years there, I think. Indeed. And I moved on to work at Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Greater Twin Cities for about 6.5 years following that. And then after going back to school for a bit, I got a cool opportunity to run a mobile pantry food shelf in Dakota County, Minnesota. Did that for about 1.5 years. And then started having kids and moved on to the community services branch of local government. So that's where I've been working the past 3 years. Right now, I'm working on the COVID-19 rent and utilities assistance program, helping administer that in Washington County. That's been getting a lot of press lately. It's had its issues, but we're having a lot of success, and it's been an interesting experience to administer that. And you mentioned that I just published a book, which is true. It's been a long time coming. I think I thought of the idea 2 years ago, watching my son use the TV remote correctly as a 1-year-old. And I just got it to market with illustrations completed, all of that good stuff. It's called What Does a Screen Mean? And it's just meant to sort of be a goodnight moon equivalent for the technology generations, because our kids, my kids, your kids, they're surrounded by phones, tablets, computers, TVs, all the live long day. And I didn't see a book that was about that to kind of help introduce, how do you think about this stuff? How do you discipline yourself with all these things? How do you not get swallowed into a swamp of screens and technology your entire life? And so I'm pretty excited. That just came out a couple days ago, and it arrived 3 weeks earlier than they told me it would. So people are starting to get it in their hands and send me pictures, and it's a lot of fun. I know you know how that goes. You had a very successful book a couple of years ago now yourself.
It is, it's super fun, and we're going to go and talk a lot more about that. But that's a really good jumping off point, because really, as part of your internal do-gooder brain, one of the things that you and I chatted about even before the launch itself is, how do you partner up with a number of organizations? Because, how do you give back as a volunteer? Not necessarily somebody who works at an organization, but all right, I want to use some of the proceeds to this book to go towards an organization. And then you and I had an interesting conversation about some organizations, and let's not name names, but we'll infer that said either yes, no, didn't get back to you, and everything in between, that sparked this conversation of how does an organization, or how should an organization, engage with volunteers who want to help fundraise or want to help give. How do we make it easier for them in real life experience recently. So I will let you set the table as sort of like how this came to be. And then I think we should walk through some best practices as somebody who has worked with Big Brothers, Big Sisters in the mobile food pantry, who you rely on volunteers all the time, and then how we can use and leverage that for relationship building as well going forward. So I will lead you with the story. You are the storyteller. You go.
Yeah, so we won't name names, but we think fairly similarly as far as trying to use our creations to help the communities that we care about. You and I think that same way. And when I had this book close to market, my thought was to involve 3 different organizations that have meant a great deal to me over the years. And without using names, we can use ratios and percentages. And I will say that one of 3 had a very quick and personal and proactive response to me saying, hey, I've got a book coming out. I have no idea how successful it'll be. First time author, but as we sell copies, I'd like to give you X percent of the sale price for however many copies sell. And they were right on the ball. I got a response within 2 hours, ideas about how to incorporate it into their organization, kind of a personal touch based on the experiences I've had with folks over the years there. That was great. And then the other 2, one took a surprisingly long amount of time to hear anything from. And when I did, it was a little bit, it came off a little bit like, well, I'm not really sure how we would absorb this into our day-to-day practices. And it made me think of your 5-day framework philosophy and book about if you're so stuck in what you're trying to do day to day, putting out fires, and you're in your events, you're in your fundraising, you're in this or that, and an opportunity comes along that just is outside of what you were planning for or expecting, but it is an opportunity. Do you really have a way to engage that and absorb it, or do you kind of get caught off guard? So great people at all these organizations, but I think I caught 2 of the organizations a little bit off guard, just stuck in the day-to-day of what they were trying to get accomplished. And I was sort of an outside voice saying, hey, can I get a minute of your time? And there wasn't a process in place to really have that conversation if you're offered something that isn't on your radar there. So the hope is ultimately we can still be engaged with these organizations that mean a great deal to me. I'd like to have the impact that I can through whatever sales occur for this. But it was interesting, and I thought of your framework with, how do you stay flexible? How do you think outside the box? And at what point do you just feel like you're so stuck in the structure of your expected events and fundraising that you really can't show any agility and kind of change direction or change speeds at any point to engage an outside voice?
I love the way that you set that up. And I know that a lot of organizations are probably nodding to themselves going, oh man, that's kind of us. I wish we weren't like that. But clearly, I think we're probably. I'd like to give you kudos for 2 things. One, to involve groups and give them the opportunity to sort of work with you, which is great. I'd also like to give you a kudos on your patience as you still really want to work with the groups who initially didn't have any interest or were not as on the ball as they should be. So not a lot of volunteers would have that because it might be one of their first times reaching out to an organization, and this was their first experience, and they're going to get burned by it. And they're like, well, hell, I'm never going to do this again. But you, as somebody who has worked in the nonprofit world and really specifically volunteer specific individuals, do you lean into patience a little bit more because you know about how archaic the organizations are, or is this just some sort of internal virtue that we should all learn from?
No, it certainly has to do with my past experience and knowing how in the structure of 3 different organizations, the kinds of calendar demands and event cycles that you can be caught in. And I couldn't even tell you, maybe I've been the one saying no to these types of requests before, and I just can't even recall because you're so busy in an intense part of your organizational cycle that things like this come along and you just don't have the bandwidth to really engage it and carve out a half hour to talk about what are you really asking for? How could this be a good thing for us? How do we set up some sort of a strategy to also incorporate this unexpected request into exposure and possible financial gain for our organization? So I will readily admit I might have done this to other folks in the past. And so I definitely have the patience to say, I know you're busy. I know you're doing really good work in the community. I basically can shrug it off if there wasn't a great response out of the gate, or if there was no response out of the gate for quite a while, just to kind of knock on the door a few more times and just be extra sure that, you know, I want to stick with this. I want it to benefit you. I know how that you're where the rubber meets the road for this mission or that mission, and I respect it. So if you're busy at the time that I first asked you, I'll wait a little bit, then I'll ask again. And maybe after the third ask, if I'm still not hearing anything, maybe that's the cutoff. And I don't know how other folks feel about that, whether they have nonprofit experience or not, or whether they're just trying to get engaged in a new community group as a volunteer. I don't know how many times folks would feel comfortable knocking on the door, but I know personally, I'll give it at least 3 shots.
Again, I think you have more patience than most. So I would like to reiterate my kudos to you. But let's talk a little bit about this. So we're going to talk a little bit about the time it takes to respond from a volunteer's perspective, from a nonprofit's perspective. And then let's talk a little bit about the creative ways on how you set things up. Is it overcomplicated? Is it too simple? And what communication we can use for that. And let's go back to the good and the one that just embraced it. And then we'll end on the win on this is the way that this is ideal. And here's how you can leverage that as both an organization as a volunteer. So let's talk about the timeline. So this goes different for everybody. And I like that you set up this where we know that everybody is busy. We know that you're wearing 10,000 different hats. We know you're pulled in different directions. You're probably one of very few people in the office or in the organization who can make decisions, or you're waiting on other people to make decisions. But the courtesy of a call back and or an email. Let's talk about that. I find myself in this same boat where I am overly extended and either I need to ask my partner in crime in the office to kind of get back and do some of these things, or I find myself in that same boat. I know the consequences of not reaching out, but maybe organizations don't. Walk me through what, from your perspective as somebody who is a volunteer lead and somebody who's worked at an organization, what the expectations are on your internal stuff as an organization, and then what that makes you feel as, and then we'll go back to the actual volunteer, but internally, organization-wise, what do you do? Is there a process, procedure? Is there a timeline?
Yeah, I mean, personally, whether it was any one of the 3 missions that I was formally connected to by formal employment, or whether it's now hearing from clients as it relates to the COVID relief program, I've always just had a personal rule that if they're asking for a point of contact, get something back to them that day, even if you're just swamped, and say, you know, this is something I'd like to pursue and have a conversation with you. It's just going to have to wait a couple of days, and, you know, give a little bit of background on why that is. But if they're asking on a particular day, at least acknowledge their ask that particular day and do your best to set up, you know, again, kind of your 5-day framework. I always tried to set some time aside on Fridays to reach back to people that had given inquiries for that particular week, whether it was, I want to be involved all the time, I've just retired and I want to be a volunteer basically full time with your organization, or I've got a friend who's involved with you and they've spoken very highly of the staff and the organization, and I'd like to see where I might fit. Things of that nature. I really tried not to ever let it get past Friday and spill over through a weekend, because then you can really lose folks if it starts to feel like, you know, maybe they go out of town for the weekend, they come back and it feels like they asked 3 weeks ago, even if it was 6 days ago. But to them, it feels like you've been dragging your feet for the better part of a month. So at least acknowledge the inquiry day of, and try your best not to let it spill past that particular work week. That's how I tried to handle things as best I could.
That's a really good thing. I love that as a best practice, which is if you can't spend the time to have the long conversation, an acknowledgement of, I got your request. I'm totally swamped. I ask your, forgiveness that I can't get to this right away, but know you're on my radar. And again, I think through this pandemic is something interesting as we kind of come out of it, where we were allowed a little bit of grace for trying to figure out how to balance work life. And I'm going to be at home with kids, or I'm going to be at work and it's going to be really awkward or whatever. But then we got to the point where we could do back-to-back meetings, because we could just sit at our desk all day and just go from one Zoom to another without any time to build in. And I think understanding now how to rebuild that into our life, where we can take a little bit more control to say, hey, listen, I need to pause through individual meetings, or I can't take all of this right now. But that simple act of acknowledging, I got what you said, please give me grace in order to get to it. I'm working on kind of the schedule. Here's my calendar, pick a time and I'd love to get a hold of you. Or no, I think we'll pass. I think organizations, and I will defer to you, I think organizations are very afraid of saying the word no, because they don't want to alienate somebody who has graciously offered something. Is it worse to say, no, thank you, I appreciate the sentiment, it'd be great, but we don't have time or a parameter for it? Or yes, but I will lead you on forever?
Yeah. Well, and whether it's an organization or our own families or our own friends, right? Like, relationships are relationships, and communication is so important. I mean, if you try to ask a family member or a friend something and they don't respond for days or weeks, that alienates you too. And from an organization standpoint, it might be true that you don't have time. You're coming up to your gala, you're doing end of the year stuff, and you just don't have time to absorb a request. You can usually at least spin it to say, a thank you. Requests like this that are not on our radar are exciting, and we'd like to get to know you and talk more about your idea. We think it has a lot of merit. You can usually find a way to at least bring that person in to a more casual or informal day at your office or with your organization, depending on what the structure of your mission is. So, if it was at the mobile food shelf that I was running, it was usually pretty easy to at least find time to connect with somebody and say, why don't you come see what we're all about? The morning shift is only a couple hours and we have coffee and pastries. Why don't you join us? You can meet some people that are involved with the organization, kind of have a more of a loose, informal roundtable about what you're thinking and how you're thinking of being involved. Or if it was something more along the lines of Big Brothers Big Sisters, where there's more advanced training and background checks and things related to you being involved with the organization, it was an easier atmosphere to find time for a quick coffee or try to meet them near where they worked. But ultimately, I think it's worse to just keep saying yes and never actually engage with the person. It's worth both of your time to carve out a little bit of slice to decide what the actual root of the idea is of the person trying to engage with your organization. Are they looking for a spotlight for themselves or something related to them? Do they have a new fundraising tentacle that could be of great value to you and your organization? Just sort of sussing out where they're coming from and what they're seeking to get out of their affiliation with you. And the sooner you can do that, 90% of the time people are looking to get involved for benevolent reasons, and you're going to want to explore that as quickly as possible so you don't lose traction and sort of accidentally end up ghosting a potential very valuable volunteer, future board member, things of that nature.
Right. I think you bring up another interesting point, which is, why don't you, as an organization, and to those listening, is you carve out time to write thank you notes, I hope, because it's Friday, appreciating. But there is a time that maybe you should carve out to both follow up and reach out to individuals you'd like to partner with in the community. And that doesn't take a boatload of time. Maybe it's 30 minutes a week. Maybe it's an hour every 2 weeks. Whatever that is just carve out time to say, listen, this is my space in order to return back to people who are interested in partnering up. And maybe if it doesn't go anywhere, that's fine, but I'm going to go and do the outreach or follow up. And then I'm going to outreach to see if there are other businesses or organizations or people that would be interested in joining our group or our organization or our cause or our mission. That simple act of just carving out the time will then leave you the space to just fill it with inquiries, or if you don't have any inquiries, allows you the space to go out and seek them. And that time management piece is so important when you are overwhelmed, so that you can say, I don't have time for this, or I do have time for this, but it's on this specific date and I know it's upcoming. So then I can prep myself and I can throw everything into that file. I'll get to those at a later time. I think that's really a smart thing. The other topic you brought up at the top of this sort of story was your perception that this was a new concept, and the new concept scared the bejesus out of them because they would have to realign or redo the things that they have been always doing. And that probably exploded their brains. Walk me through how that sort of made you feel, even though you've got a relationship with some of these organizations. And have you experienced that as somebody who ran volunteers and organizations that ran on volunteers when you were working?
Sure. I try to be conscious of, when coming to these organizations with the book and trying to do a percentage of sales to their benefit, I really wanted to make sure I wasn't asking for sort of work hours time or anything overly involved on their behalf. Being able to advertise that this was something that would benefit the organization is really all that I was after and am still after from those particular organizations, because I know it's harder to accommodate when someone just walks up to you and says, I'd like you to come do sort of a speech or an involved project on a particular site that's unknown to the organization for a day or two. I mean, that's much harder to work in. But from my end, having the nonprofit experience, just wanting to say, I don't want you guys to have to really change much. I want you to just keep going about your business, but I'd like to find a way for my own passion project to benefit your organization, at least in some small way, if you can just get a blurb out there in a couple of different avenues for that. So I tried to make it as low intensity, low investment on their end as possible. And like I said, I don't think anything untoward was meant by the non-response that I got from a couple of these organizations, but I do think that it just becomes tunnel vision with horse blinders on about, we're in this month, this week, this project. That's what we're thinking about until we can say end of May, we're done with this. And then we're on to something in June. And it can just be kind of hard to elbow your way in and say, I just want to be standing in the room. You don't have to make a big market share slice for me. Just let me get in here and benefit you in a fairly passive way, if you'll allow it. But I think organizations get a lot of requests. They get a lot of ideas from folks, and from my own experience, if it's at the food pantry, it was often, you guys do good work. We'd love for you to come to our site. We have a site in mind, whether it's a school, a retirement community, something of that nature. And that's worth a conversation. You're trying to build in, could you actually become part of our long-term calendar? And how would that work? And what do we have to square away? But if you're talking about just onboarding new volunteers, that should always be something that's able to be accommodated at any point. Because whether it's, fundraising with CFF or, finding mentors at Big Brothers Big Sisters, or having people to help physically take food and move it where it needs to go so it reaches the communities that you're intending to meet. If you start prioritizing things in front of volunteer engagement, you end up in some trouble. You end up with people fading away. You end up with people reducing their hours with you or their dollars with you. If you start thinking about things from just a production standpoint of, we have to spend less time on relationships so that we can just organizationally do more logistical things and feel more productive. That's sort of the beginning of a downward spiral. If you take your eyes and your focus off of building these relationships and getting to know folks, you have to know why they're wanting to get involved with you. If it's a personal motivation, the family member is motivating them. They have a connection to the mission in their past. I mean, I felt that all the time at nonprofits of, I could get a lot more done today, or I could talk to people more. And you kind of fight that battle in your head. I'm guessing you feel the same way sometimes about, I like talking to people more than I like pushing the logistics of the job. But if I don't get enough time to push the logistics, we're not accomplishing what we need to for our events or for our engagement. And so you always have this clock in your head going, can I keep talking in this group or with this person? Do I have time to go meet a whole new human being and get to know their background and their passions and their interests to correctly assimilate them to the organization? Or do I just need to get these reports done and I just need to get the desk work piece of the job done? So it's a constant battle, and you always wonder if you're striking the right balance, in my experience.
Yes, 100% true. And again, third-party endorsement is exponentially more important than first-party solicitation, but that comes with a cost if you are not paying attention to those who are going to talk about your organization, and if you are not paying attention to those who are really willing and able and your frontline volunteers, and you're treating them as secondary to spreadsheets, well, then they're going to talk to other volunteers. And like you said, that's a rabbit hole you just don't want to go down. And I would be remiss if, speaking of rabbit holes we haven't gone down yet, is talking about the good, the one organization that said, hey, how on earth can we not pass this up? Got back to you in 2 hours. Is it fair to say that out of the gate, you're going to spend more time trying to work with them more than you would the first two because it's less of a struggle? And can nonprofits learn a lesson there on not only jumping at an opportunity, but at least being proactive enough to right away respond?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you've got a warm yes to go off of, and they're saying, yeah, you were involved with us in these ways for this number of years, and some people are still here that and they were excited to hear that you have this book and you're looking to involve the organization. Like, how can we work together? That's far and away the organization that I'm going to send emails back to first, and brainstorm with, and be more willing to go meet face-to-face at their office. If we can come up with some ways to further expand the potential reach of this, to sell more books and get more money back in their pockets by way of those sales. We talked about, I'll be patient with organizations that didn't have a fast response or the type of warm response that I would have expected. But that's human nature, that if you've got one very welcoming party and two that you kind of have to fight your way into, absolutely, you'll get more traction and interest in the organization that's got a better response to you.
And if that person is probably reaching out to you, he's probably, or she's reaching out to other organizations, and know that as somebody who is a volunteer coordinator or somebody who is responsible for communication, is if it's not you, it's somebody else. And what could that individual do or be in the future? Board member, donor, volunteer, supporter, cheerleader, etc. All right. Give me, Yeah, well, I mean, and the name of your organization is Do Good Better. In this situation between three organizations, the one that can help me do good smoothly and most easily, in my head at the end of the day, if I'm talking to my wife at dinner and thinking like, I'm trying to help three organizations,
I don't know why I'm not getting much accomplished as far as two of them go. At the end of the day, with all the competing things you have for your time and your efforts and your sweat and all that throughout the day with work and family and all that, I can, at the end of the day, rationalize one, doing good some way. So I'm just going to do it with this one organization and no hard feelings, and I'm going to leave the other two behind.
Yeah.
So if you can help somebody do good smoothly, then you're on a good path. But yeah, you're right. It's easy to choose one over three if you're still putting your head on the pillow and saying, well, I'm doing good for the community. I'm just doing it in the way that was made accessible to me.
I like that we just figured out which clip we're going to use for the promo for this actual podcast right there. All right. I would be remiss if we didn't chat about the book one more time. Highlights. You had your 1-year-old working a TV remote. How is the feedback coming? And it's a children's book. It's so accessible. And I think as parents, we don't really know how to have this conversation. I'm dreading the what's happening to my body conversation down the road with my children. Who knew that I would equally dread how we talk about technology with our kids because they're so attached. Talk a little bit about how the experience was writing the book, how the feedback has been, and then ultimately then we're gonna have to figure out how to get this into people's hands, and we'll talk about that in a second.
Sure. Yeah. I wrote this in rhyming couplets in my head over the course of a few months after I saw Lewis as a 1-year-old correctly using the TV remote. And I just thought, man, I am not ready for this. This is going to be a big, big challenge and problem as he grows up. And that just caused me to reflect that, well, I'm looking at a screen almost my entire day as well. I start work at 6 a.m. on a computer screen. I stop at 4:30. After that, I'm checking social media. I'm responding to emails. Lewis wants a show on during dinner. Like, the screens just don't stop all day long. And one of the things that I liked as I was writing it was, this is actually, as a parent, a good guide for me, that if and when this becomes a real book, when I read this, it's a reminder to myself as the adult, the father or the caretaker, to say, what screens was I using today and how much of that was actually fruitful, and what parts of my screen time were more or less wasted, that I got my priorities backwards and I was looking at my screen when other things should have been taking my attention. So feedback so far has been great. 3 people, the book came out 3 weeks earlier than they told me it would. So I started getting texts yesterday that I didn't expect of people actually holding the book. And the feedback was great. They read it with their kids. One of my good friend's sons said that he loved that I rhymed adventure with denture, and that was his favorite part, which is fine. However you want to access it. And I love getting that type of feedback. But yeah, they just say, write what you know, or solve your own problem. And when I saw Lewis using the remote as a 1-year-old, and I looked online for, are there any books about how to kind of absorb this world of technology and how to create a little bit of discipline about how often you're asking for it or how often you're using it. And there was nothing. There was a couple horrible looking books that were geared towards like 10-year-olds.
Right.
So I just decided, this seems like an open niche to me, that I could write this book and just try to make it sort of a Goodnight Moon equivalent for the technology generation. And read it with Lewis last night. He loved the illustrations. Kevin Cannon, who I worked with, turned out to be the college roommate of one of my friends from Big Brothers Big Sisters on staff there. So it's a small world.
Yep.
Yeah. But it's super bright and colorful, and it's rhyming couplets. So it's geared towards little kids, and just trying to find a way to take a lot of big, hairy adult problems in the world and reduce them to digestible bites for little kids. If the book does well enough, I've got a half dozen more ideas I'd love to pursue. But making a book is a lengthy time pursuit, financial investment. So we'll see. But it's pretty cool that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, hundreds of people now are going to have a copy of a book that I wrote that was inspired by my son, and the dedication is to my sons. So I feel good that there's that tangible imprint in the world for myself and my family at this point. So it's cool.
you're an organization that has kids, or you're an organization with families, or you're an organization that has a library, or anything that you give away books, this is what you're going to have to get. And how on earth do they get this book?
Yeah, so we just got the ebook registered on Amazon yesterday. So you can get it for your Kindle if that's how you prefer to go about things. I know from talking to folks, most families want a physical copy of the book for their kids, and it's available at Itasca Books and will shortly be posted for a physical book delivery on Amazon as well.
Outstanding. We'll put all the links in the comments below. And as a professional, I appreciate what you're doing in the volunteer landscape. Personal, super proud of you for not only writing that book, but sort of setting it up for success. And it's going to be a fantastic. It's gonna go gangbusters. It's gonna go absolutely going to be fantastic. So I'm super proud of you and super excited for you. So everybody listening, just go that book, click on the links below, go buy a copy for yourself and 2 copies for friends. And then that's a birthday present you should give all your new parents. There it is. It's a newborn gift idea for all the things. Tim, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It took us 100 so episodes for you to get on, which is sad and horrible, but I'm glad we did. And so many great nuggets of information and best practices when it comes to volunteers. Kudos to you, my friend. Thanks for being on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time, and you're always an inspiration and still a mentor 14 years later after meeting you at the CF office. So I'm looking forward to your mid-July party for Do Good Better. That's going to be insane. I'm super proud of you for getting that together. I know it was a huge, heavy lift, but you're going to have food trucks and music and great speakers, and you're crushing it as always.
And you're the best. Maybe feel good about myself, and I love that. We'll talk to you guys next time on the official Do Good Better podcast.